is Clene Hedspeth, and I am the Director of Curatorial Services here at the DuSable Museum. Before that, I was Director of Education and Public Programming. I am super excited about this event. This is the first of many. I want to tell everyone in this room, welcome home. This is your space, and I expect to get tons of emails from different folks asking what we're doing and how you guys can, how we can be better as an institution. So I'm very excited. I've had the opportunity to work with Kim several years ago, and she's an amazing, amazing person. Oh my God. And I'm just happy everyone's here, and I want to welcome the Center on Halsted and their partnering organizations. And like I said, this is the first of many. We want to be very intentional as an institution. And so we are looking to you to help us be accountable and do what we're supposed to do as an institution. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I get to do the formal introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Thompson, and I am the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for the Anti-Violence Project at Center on Halsted. And I would just like to officially welcome you all to tonight's Courageous Conversation, which is in honor of Black History Month, Activism Then and Now. And before we begin with tonight's program, just wanted to give a big thanks to those who helped make tonight possible and just all of our events this month possible. Obviously, staff here at DuSable Museum of African American History, including Lee Bay and Clene Hedspeth, for not only allowing us to use this space tonight, but really just working with us, because I'm like the mad email lady who will be like, respond to my emails. So thank you for dealing with probably way too many emails. Our sponsors for this year's Black History Month events throughout the month at Center on Halsted, Equality Illinois and Pride Action Tank. Thank you for your continued support throughout the year, even after Black History Month. Can TV for filming tonight's event, and also Windy City Times for covering the event as well. And then what I like to call the fellow Black History Month planning team, my two ladies right here, Nicole Holmes and Jess Thompson, who are also staff at Center on Halsted. Yeah, give them a round of applause. And the three of us really thought about what we wanted to bring to Center on Halsted in terms of celebrating Black History Month this year. And this was a conversation that started way back in the fall, and lots of ideas and meetings. And this is what we came up with, and really trying to make sure that we represent the Black community and Black culture in the best way that we can. And so I really do appreciate just being able to work with you all on a daily basis. And hopefully, as Clene said, this is the one of many different events that we can do. And also, I just have one quick housekeeping note. As mentioned, Can TV is filming tonight's event. So even though the camera crew will be primarily focused on the panel, if at any point you are uncomfortable and do not want to be filmed, or if you come up to the Q&A mics to ask a question and don't want to be filmed, just let me or the cameraman know, and we'll make sure to not include you in the final filming. And so let us actually move on to tonight's program. Tonight we'll hear from our 4 panelists and our 1 moderator. And time pending, which we should have time to open it up to Q&A, so you see those 2 mics in the back. If you end up having a question, feel free to walk up to the microphone and ask your question. And so I want to introduce you to our panelists. You should have their full bios in the program, but we gotta give a shout out to each of them before we actually start. And so Kim Hunt, who everybody knows, is currently Executive Director of Pride Action Tank. Her career spans the public, private, and nonprofit sectors with a focus on collaborative approaches, advocacy, and project management. Kim is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the Cook County State's Attorney's Vernita Gray Lifetime Achievement Award, and was inducted into the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame. So please, now you can clap, and welcome Kim Hunt. Our next panelist, Anthony Charles Galloway, Equality Illinois' Director of Civic Engagement and co-chair of BTAN Chicago, is an East St. Louis native with lived experiences as an artist, community organizer, fundraiser, and activist. Anthony has received many honors for his work, including the Creating Change Award from the National LGBT Task Force, Windy City Times 30 Under 30 recipient, and the 2017 Bright Horizons Honor Award from Planned Parenthood. So please help me welcome Anthony. Angelina Nordstrom, who is a Tennessee native, took Chicago by storm with her larger-than-life presence and truth of her journey. By being an employee at Center on Halsted, Nordstrom has honed and utilized her networking and de-escalation skills to build and nurture strong relationships with leaders and members of the Black LGBTQ community. Please help me welcome Angelina. Beverly Ross of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago is the facilitator for Project Elevate, a CDC-CARS initiative that is promoting the sexual health of young women of color and young trans women of color. Beverly is also one of the faces of and ambassador for the Prep for Love campaign, where she is featured on CTA bus shelters and billboards across the city of Chicago. Please help me welcome Beverly. And last but not least, our moderator for the evening, Dr. Kevin Mumford, professor of history at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Mumford's selected publications include Not Straight, Not White, Black Gay Men from the March on Washington to the AIDS Crisis, and Interzones, Black-White Sex Districts in Chicago and New York in the early 20th century. He teaches courses on the construction of race, African American history, and the history of sexuality, and is currently working on a study of social mixtures in post-war U.S. culture. Please help me welcome Dr. Mumford. And so now I will turn it over to Dr. Mumford, who would be moderating the rest of tonight's evening.
All right, good. Let's see if this is working. Is this working? All right, good evening. I envision this as a kind of a back and forth with offering a few opening questions and then letting the conversation go as it may, and then as we talked about, making sure that there was plenty of time for you to raise questions, come back to questions that I asked, and offer completely new ideas. So my last book was a history of activists. Black gay men in particular, from the 60s to the 90s. And so I'm kind of interested in how your personal biography led you toward activism, sort of what you could think about in your personal lives that prompted you to take the unusual step of wanting to have an impact. And we could go like in order this way down the table, or as the spirit moves you.
I don't mind starting with Anthony.
Of course. Oh, that puts the pressure on me. So, as my bio said, I'm from East St. Louis, which is right across the border from St. Louis, downstate, Illinois. And you know, I grew up in a predominantly African-American community, and then about 13, 14, Mom decided to move us out to the suburbs so I could get a better education and not necessarily be a victim of violence, to be quite honest. But prior to me moving to the suburbs, my grandmother, who is very present in my life, and has always been present in my life, made the decision to instill in me that civic engagement and being a part of the community was very important at a very young age. I remember a time when my grandmother, there was a company called American Bottoms. And American Bottoms was a water company that, quite frankly, took advantage of the African-American community of East St. Louis, a very poor African-American community of East St. Louis. And I remember watching a tape my grandmother had brought home from the city council meeting. And forgive me, I don't remember all of the details of that meeting. But I remember my grandmother standing up as a regular individual in the community and deciding to make a change and barking, quite frankly, at the city council and at the mayor. And it was at that point where it was just pretty much a part of my family. My grandfather was the city manager of East St. Louis. I was knocking on doors for candidates that I didn't even know at 8 years old because somebody thought it was cool to have me tag along. So I don't have to look far from my community. I don't need the history books to tell me because I had it right there in my family. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really inspired me to become active in my community.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're taking a pass right now. You need a little more time?
Yeah, give me some more time.
Okay, okay, Beverly.
I'm gonna go because I'm actually. I'm gonna go. Thank you, Anthony, for that.
Totally not fair.
I'm nervous, so this is nothing new, but this is new. So basically, I'm gonna say what guys, got me into being an advocate and activism in my community. Honestly, it's my struggle being African American first, being trans second. I say my struggle started with me being in high school, elementary school, being myself and not having the faculty at school, the teachers, and the principals, not knowing how to handle a black kid who is trying to express themselves in, school, basically. So basically my struggle in school, being homeless, and it's just like a brief. So I don't know.
You're gonna stop there?
Oh yeah.
Wow, you were going.
Oh no, I'm nervous. So everybody's looking at me. No.
Right.
But no, that is why I.
Beverly is just getting warmed up. She
yes.
will be fine.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I am an activist in my community for trans women of color and trans health.
Oh. Okay, it's on me. All right. Yeah. First of all, before I answer the question, I want to lift up how significant it is for the Center on Halsted to be having a program at the Sabo Museum. So kudos. And when I saw where this event was going to be, I emailed Joanna and went, "What? How did you do that? That's amazing." So thank you, Clene, and thank Lee. So I remember my, first act of advocacy in 3rd grade, and like you, I had no idea what I was doing, but it was an effort, or I don't know who organized it, but there was referendum or something on the books. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, not far on the other side of the state from St. Louis, and there was a referendum to add a tax, or what was called a levy in Missouri, to provide more funding for schools. And it was, somebody thought it was a bright idea for public school students to actually be a part of some parade or something to bring attention to this and to get people to vote for it. And I just remember us having on this, the girls anyway, having on these little navy blue plaid kulak sets. I don't know if people remember kulak. and white shirts, and just marching and saying, "Vote for the levy." I didn't even know what the levy was, but and I have no idea how successful that was. But there was activism throughout my family in some form. My grandmother in particular did a lot of work through the church. She was one of those, Baptist women who that's where her mission was, to do work through the church. She was also a business owner, so she had some things to say about being an entrepreneur. My mother was what I would call a quiet activist. She did some work through the church too, but she at one point, and I had to put the pieces together later in my life, worked for the federal agency that oversaw urban renewal in Kansas City. And I remember there was the big project then was to create a new highway that was probably being talked about from the time I was in grade school and finally came to fruition when I was in graduate school maybe. But it was a big project that took out a lot of neighborhoods. And she was in the office that was responsible for making sure that folks got compensated for their property. And she would do things like, give people the official word about what they had to do, but then also say, here are some shortcuts, and here's how to make sure that you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So I saw her do those kinds of things, and you know, I just don't remember activism not being part of our family in one way or another. So it's just in the DNA, I guess.
All eyes are on me, I guess. Well, many years back in the day, being from Tennessee, there's still a lot of things that are very prevalent, and there are a lot of things that are very just blatant when it comes to one's perception of someone else who comes from a different walk of life. And although I did not really notice a lot of those differences and things of that sort when I was coming up, it became more apparent. And I can say that once I finally got a chance to get out of Tennessee and I started college at K-State, and that's when I noticed that there are many things going on in life beyond, you know, Tennessee. And at the time, I was studying business management and pre-medicine. I wanted to go into med school at the time. And so I was there for a year, and throughout that year when I lived in Kansas, I noticed that it was a little less tense and a little more refreshing for me, but for a good friend of mine who identified also as part of the LGBTQ community, it wasn't quite as welcoming for her. And unfortunately, she experienced being called racial slurs in the workplace where we worked at together while being in college. And so I think that was the beginning point for me to kind of shift from studying pre-medicine to studying HR and wanting to go to law school. So after that, I moved back to Tennessee and started living and being more part of the Black community. And you know, and this was years before my transition. As the years went by and I saw how all these things were occurring in Memphis, especially when it came down to all these parks named after Confederate soldiers and the Ku Klux Klan like boycotting the name changes and just the different forms of corruption that takes place, just gradually inspired me and motivated me to really think, how can a person, you know, be a part of change? And probably the year before I moved to Chicago, I decided and thought to myself, if I were to get back into school, I wanted to be not an attorney necessarily, but a judge. So eventually I got sick of Tennessee, I got sick of the lack of resources and the fact of not even knowing what trans was at the time. So when I moved to Chicago, I experienced a sense of homelessness, and I experienced just having to really get acclimated with the area, get acclimated with the resources, acclimated with who's who, and how can I be, I guess, a little more conformative with the system without having to, you know, give them too much. So over the years of being here, I became familiar with people who are very influential, and I started learning more about what it means to be a voice and what it means to stand up for those who don't have much and for those who don't know their way around. And after getting the job at the center and after I started working there, it really shifted and even became more of an epiphany of how important it is to be a great example for the community. And just because the center might not be a big staple for the Black community doesn't mean that the people that's there are not either. So I worked hard to get back into school, and I'm in school right now. I'm gonna make it, and I'm going to make sure that I utilize my experiences, my knowledge, in order to be more of an advocate for the community. Because if you can't beat the system, you gotta infiltrate it from the inside.
Well, it does lead nicely to my next set of questions, which is thinking about some of the limitations on doing activism. Certainly the people that I wrote about had to overcome problems of resources, of having enough resources, and also feeling that even as there was a big mobilization around AIDS in the beginning of the 90s, that white gay men were too often blinded towards the problems of men of color, that there was a breakdown between men of color and the kind of new white activism that emerged. And if you have memories of that, or if you see a persistence of that, of tensions within the gay community over activism and how that manifests itself. I can move on.
Where do we begin? No,
Please, by all means,
Kim. Microphone in front of you.
Absolutely. So yes, I do see racial tensions within the LGBTQ community. And I also see, some of my struggles, I have had the great opportunity of working with organizations and for organizations that are pretty well resourced. I've worked for Planned Parenthood, I worked for AIDS Foundation, Howard Brown, you name it. If there's an organization, I probably work there. I have to say, it's been great working for those institutions because I've been able to do things in a way that if I worked for a smaller institution may not have been as resourced. One of the struggles as a Black gay man, Black queer man that I kind of deal with is, living and working in the same community. Oftentimes, we are able to, many of us are able to go to work and have a cocktail maybe at happy hour and go home and kind of like deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. But sometimes, you go to bed with stuff and stuff sticks with you. And sometimes the very racism and homophobia and sexism that you're fighting against is impacting you at the same time. And people are telling you not to take it personal. But it is very personal. And you still, go home and you suffer from that. And I'm not just talking about white folks, right? I'm talking about Black folk too. We can be very difficult to work for and work with because of the issues that have been thrown at us. And I think oftentimes it's important to bring that into the space as well. I lived in Boys Town when I first got here. And the first weekend I was here, I heard a white man say to a Black man, they were in an argument. He says, I can say it, nigga, go back on the South Side. And I heard the Black man exclaim, I'm not from the South Side. And I was like, whoa, what city did I just walk into? Where you were just called a nigga, but you are fighting against not being from the South Side.
Yeah.
And dealing with the internalized racism, dealing with externalized racism, can sometimes be, hurtful. Now, oftentimes I think about, why am I still doing this? Why am I still doing this? But if not you, then who? Quite frankly. So those are some of the struggles I deal with as an activist. I could talk about racism. I can talk about lack of resources. I could talk about the racial tensions. But how do we rise people up to just give a damn about what's going on?
Yeah, I think to add to what Anthony's saying, every ism in broader society is in the LGBTQ community too, a microcosm of that, and sometimes probably hurt each other more because there's so much trauma and so many different levels with all the different identities that folks have. Before Pride Action Tank, I was executive director at Affinity Community Services, which is an organization on the South Side focused on Black LGBTQ communities. And its broad mission was to bring an LGBTQ voice to Black communities and a Black voice to LGBTQ communities. So, big project, a lot of stress, a lot of discussions around identity and intersecting identities and all of that. And and trying to find that common ground in advocacy spaces to move forward. And in doing that, a lot of push and pull around larger institutions and folks who were white, just letting go of some of their power, sharing some of the power for us to get the work done. I will say over the years that I've been doing this work, I see a lot of collaboration in the LGBTQ community here. I don't know what it's like in other cities. I've seen folks go from, being in their silos to finding ways to come together and partner, even if it's on small things, and certainly around some larger issues. But I think we sometimes jump over the hard work when we're creating our partnerships and coalitions, because we still haven't had a lot of those discussions and ongoing discussions around all the different identities within our community or communities, and how to, we're not going to get rid of oppression and privilege, but we do have to learn to really work through those issues and not stay at the surface level. And I think that's the biggest challenge right now. We're quick to jump on projects and opportunities for advocacy to move parts of our community forward, because we're not always as inclusive around that as we should be. But I don't think we're still doing the deeper level work that needs to be done as a community.
Do you want to add anything?
Could you repeat that question again?
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been like quite a few minutes.
I think it was a question about divisions within the community and whether, the first thing that I mentioned was kind of white gay racism and the kind of lack of consciousness around that, and how that impacted your attempt to be an activist, or if there were creative responses to that, or if it was just a kind, or barriers. I mean, to add on to the question, one of the things, again, acting like an historian, one of the things that I found amongst the cohort of people that I studied was a persistent sense of isolation. That they were often the only ones like them in the room when they were advocating. And what do you do? How do you take care of yourself, or how do you think about how has that impacted you, and how do you go forward in that situation?
I never experienced being isolated in situations because a lot of women came before me, like Sylvia Riviera. We have new, pop culture now's big thing was, Janet Mock, Laverne Cox. So I'm myself, but I'm just doing what I do. So I have never been isolated in a situation where I'm in a room and it's like I'm the only person advocating for something. So it's, I'm kind of privileged in some ways of being an advocate now, versus back then when back in the 50s and the 60s when we had these fallen divas, I call them, screaming gay power for trans liberation and gay liberation. So so I'm just here I'm just finishing what they started basically in my own way.
Yeah.
So with that being said, being part of Chicago Public Schools, like Anthony was talking about, his parents that want him to be a part of the violence, and I was a part of it. Not getting an education because I was getting bullied because I was gay. And so I kind of use my voice now. I'm actually, AIDS Foundation has collaborated with the Chicago Public Schools with the transgender guidelines, not only for trans, for LGBTQ youth of color. Trans now is a big thing now. People are, kids are, I'm not gonna say kids, but young trans folks are transitioning now, starting at 5 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to educate these, you know, educate the faculty, not only the faculty but the students, on how to treat people and how to, you know, accept. So basically, that's kind of what I'm doing now. Yeah. So, yeah. That's a. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't fully aware of the division between the Black LGBTQ community and the white LGBTQ community until after moving to Chicago. And even then, I mean, it started to really hit me because, you know, when you've been in one place all your life, sometimes you just are not as aware as you should be of the world around you. When I was at K-State, I can tell you plenty of times of when I would be the only person of color in that classroom, and I don't lose a sense of who I am because there are many other people from other walks of life other than my own. And fortunately, I was grounded enough to not conform, because when you conform, you lose yourself, and when you lose yourself, you can become part of bad company, and then when you become part of bad company, you eventually fall into an abyss of nothingness. And if you don't stand for something, you can fall for anything.
Yeah.
So once I moved to Chicago, and I've noticed the division. There was a sense of division among the LGBTQ community. In Memphis, there was never really a big sense of that because it was a very close-knit community. It was very intimate. It was almost as if no matter where you come from, you probably know this person or that person in one sense or another. But in Chicago, it's a little different because people stand for different things. People hang out in different settings. Some people are socialites, some people are advocates, and some people work for an organization, and some others just like to be promiscuous. So just a matter of what you stand for. And when I noticed that there's like a big division, the first thing I like to do is, you know, give them some education, give them some school, give them some info, something tangible that they can take with them, that they can internalize and really know that just because he's black does not mean he likes being called well, I can say it, a nigga. I would be insulted if someone called me that, especially in a sense of someone who does not know me from a can of paint and someone who does not identify with the, I guess, African American condition. And I educate people when it comes to pronouns. I educate people when it comes to being pansexual, being demisexual, being whatever. And I educate people on what it means to be a minority. Sometimes people don't know what it means to be a minority. Sometimes people don't know what it means to be a woman. Sometimes people don't know what it means to just be non-binary. And it's just a matter of being on the same page instead of just holding on to your differences. Look at the similarities. The similarities will get us a lot further. That's what unites us, and that's what strengthens the human condition. So I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
Can I add something to that? So Chicago has a lot of LGBTQ organizations, right? And that's because historically, and it still occurs, there are the divisions that you talked about. In, I think it was 2010, when Daley decided not to run for mayor again, there were a couple small organizations that said we should do an LGBTQ mayoral candidate forum. And it was the three small organizations that had this conversation. It was Affinity, it was ALMA, and it was Amigas Latinas. And brought that to other groups. And we thought, well, why don't we make sure this is a community effort so that not one or two organizations owns this, so to speak. So let's reach out to other organizations. We had a list of like 32 LGBTQ/HIV prevention organizations that were a part of that effort. And some people would say that that is, having that many organizations is inefficient, and why don't they all merge or something like that. But those organizations exist because there are times when you just want to be with your people, you know? And it is all well and fine to come together around certain things, and we should, but we also, I think, need those spaces still that speak to our particular identities.
I so agree, Kim. I absolutely agree. Excuse me. I'm getting over a little cold, so excuse me there.
Stay over there.
That's why I'm on this end of the table. I do not want to give you my germs. I so agree with that statement. Sometimes I think what I do love about Chicago, because we beat up on Chicago a lot in the national and you know, not necessarily locally, but the national news really every night beats up on Chicago, especially when our president, Obama, not Trump, was in office. What I do appreciate about Chicago is that I'm able to go to a bar and I'm able to be around a lot of black folk. And our culture is being celebrated. I also like to go to Boys Town when I want a more, not necessarily a more diverse experience, but a different experience, right? I also find that, you know, when I came to the city, I'm like, I was one of those people, why does these small little organizations exist? Why don't they merge with the larger organizations? Wouldn't that help things out a little bit? Absolutely not, because I've worked in the larger organizations and I've heard people talk and I've heard people speak and I'm like, oh, that's why they exist. Right?
Now you're getting it.
You know how we talk about folks sometimes in our own communities is really really speaks to how we treat them. And so if we have an organization, I remember Rocks. How many folks have heard of Montrose Rocks in the room?
It was Belmont.
It's Belmont.
I'm sorry, the Belmont Rocks was before my time. How many folks in the room have heard of Montrose Rocks, the LGBT Pride event that happened right during the Pride Parade? So real quick, do I have a few seconds to give it? So I came to Chicago in 2007. I sat out 2007. I came to Chicago because I just wanted to get out of St. Louis. St. Louis is what we're describing about Chicago is a smaller version of Chicago. St. Louis is. St. Louis is very divided, but the difference is that the black folks in St. Louis don't have any resources, right? Because there are no resources. And I just woke up depressed one morning and I said, I gotta get the hell up out of here. I applied for a job, came here, sat out for a year because I knew I wanted to be in community work. Got here, and there was so much fighting from the Park District, from the commander, about why black people cannot come. And I'm talking about 15,000 black folk and Latinx folk. I'm not talking about a small number of people. Why they could not come out there and dance and have a good time. Well, there was a fight that broke out. Well, you have 1 million people at the parade. I'm sure 5 fights broke out at the parade. Like, the standard of what we have put up against black people is sometimes so hard to reach. And I remember just in that 2 or 3 years of working on Montrose Rocks being so torn down. I was working at a white institution at the time. That really didn't want to have anything to do with it. They really, like, what does this mean for our organization, Anthony, if something were to happen? And I'm like, you're getting money from CDCs, from the Chicago Department of Public Health, millions of dollars to take care of our community, and that is your freaking response? So, I just saw Black Panther last night, so you may see a little bit of that going on. But I want to have a real conversation here, right? You know, Tracy, you've covered it. You know, you covered and I'm not saying that the Montrose people who organized the event didn't do everything above board, right? there was a rush to get permits done, right? There was a rush to get permits done. That's because we didn't have no money. We were begging people for $500. We had institutions, not to beat up on the center on Halsted, but we would reach out to the center on Halsted and our emails wouldn't be returned. I reached out to Equality Illinois. I'm gonna put Equality Illinois, I'm gonna equalize it. Before I worked there, I reached out to Equality Illinois. They didn't reach back out to me. We had institutions that were supposed to be taking care of us that were ignoring a huge segment of our community. And then we also had Black folks fighting us, saying, well, why do you all even need to have that? And the same person that would ask me that, I would see them out there. And I'm like, so I'm so glad that Kim brought that up, because I think it's very important that Black folks have a space to be with Black folks and to have company with Black folks.
That's right.
I love the white people in the room. You know? And I invite white folks to come to the South Side and be a part of us, right? You know, I'm gonna do that. I have white friends, okay? But also, I think it's very important that we, as Black people, learn how to love one another and show other people how we love each other and to be a part of that experience. That's why I went to work for Equality Illinois.
All right.
Not because I thought they were a great institution. I actually thought they were a pretty bad institution. And during my onboarding, I said that. I said, this is why you shouldn't hire me, right? Because, you know, this is how I feel. And I am so lucky to work, and we have a new CEO. Well, he's not so new anymore. But they said to me, Anthony, that's why we want you here. We want you here so that we can make sure that we're doing things right. And I think my institution, as a result of me being there, as a result of Elise, I want to recognize Elise Mallory, who's here, has changed for the better. And Equality Illinois wasn't a bad organization, right? They just wasn't taking care of our community in a way that I thought they should be doing. That's Anthony Gallo's opinion. Somebody else may tell you something different. But for me, I come and I go to work every day because I know that it's important to have people like me, that look like me, that have had my experience working there every single day to make sure that we are getting the things that we need in our community. And so that's why, so I think it's also important for us to be a part of a larger collective and also that we are part of a small collective. And I'm sorry, I'll yield. You can reclaim your time.
Does anybody want to add on to that? Or do you want me to? I can bring up another subject, or do you want to? Sure. Okay. So I'm not sure how applicable this is, but again, going off of my my research, one of the things that this generation of Black gay men and women, Black lesbian feminists, Black lesbians, started in the 1980s and early 1990s was to construct anthologies like Brother to Brother and the Barbara Smith anthology, Some of Us Are Brave, and this work of trying to get voices of Black queer people in the public. And I'm wondering, some of that I feel has been overlooked, or maybe there was a lapse where there wasn't as much work being done. I'm just wondering if you see that as important, the sort of cultural work around. I mean, for them, the last point I'll make, for them it was also a sense that Black queer people had been kind of damaged by negative imagery. By both, and I'm just thinking, do you see that work as important to your activism, the kind of cultural side?
I definitely need to say something on this one. So as someone who loves to write, I am a spoken word poet for those who don't know, and I'm a lyricist as well. When it comes to anthologies, it's a great concept of documenting history, and it's a great sense of documenting where we were at the time and where we intend to go. And the fact that there has not been an anthology in a while is a little alarming, because that's how people lose sense of where they come from. And if we go too long without documenting our experiences and our feelings and our struggles, then history will be deemed to repeat itself. There's just no way around that. I personally love to document my situations in life and document my experiences, and if I can find some way possible, I can get them published. And once I get them published, I can say I've done something. It may not be a lot, but at least someone can look at that book cover and they read a piece from me and say, I've been through that. They don't have to go through it alone. A person does not have to go through that alone. And going years at a time without an anthology, or going years at a time without something from that time frame, is almost damaging to the story of Black history. That's why we've had many authors from the past, such as Langston Hughes and James Baldwin, and many others who have contributed to the narrative that we have experienced in one way or another. And that's something that I have also taken as, I guess, a pleasure to document in my own way. And it would be great to pick up where they left off. So that's kind of like where I stand on that.
I would agree. I think that cultural aspect of our community is huge. I was just at a screening at Affinity for Inina Jay's poetry that Tracy had the foresight to make sure it got documented. And it was a very powerful experience to hear the work of this amazing Black queer woman talk about her life and struggles through poetry. There was an anthology a few years ago, social justice activists writing through a science fiction lens. I cannot remember the name of it to save my life right now. A lot of those folks are queer and Black. All of them were Black. So that's one anthology that comes to mind. And while I was on my recent vacation, hallelujah for vacation, self-care, yes, I finished How We Get Free, Black Feminism in the Combahee River Collective by this amazing Black queer scholar whose name I always screw up, but Kianga Taylor. I can never get the middle name right. And it just reminded me of how important those anthologies were. I grew up reading a lot of those because I was just at the age where some of those pieces had been out, some of those works had been out maybe 10 years or less. And in my women's studies classes, I went to undergrad in Iowa, so to get a Black written piece of work was amazing. But they were life-changing, and I know that there is an effort, and I think you're going to say,
Yeah.
okay, so I'll save that one. So anthologies are coming, but I think we need more.
So forgive me for grabbing my phone because
That's exactly what I
I
did.
I wanted to find this for folks. Growing up, so from East St. Louis, we traveled up to a little city just west of East St. Louis called Belleville. Belleville, Illinois. And 13 years old, I had 5 sisters, all younger than me, right? And I was the only boy in the household. And I remember during the summer months, I had to babysit, be my sister that's next to me. And I would sneak off and go to the library and sneak and find a book of gay folk, book of stories about gayness at 15 years old. I'm 36 now, so that was 21 years ago. Wow. And
That's a whole generation.
That's a whole generation. I still think of myself as a young person.
You are young.
You are comparatively to some folks. So I remember sneaking the book out of the library, stealing the book actually, not sneaking out. I stole the book out of the library because I was so afraid that the librarian was going to judge me, right? And I stole that book. I did bring it back though. And I remember reading it and reading it and reading it, and my grandmother found it. And she acted like she didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point, though, I remember as a young gay man, what that did for me to be able to learn when nobody else was talking about being gay in Belleville, Illinois, right? Mm-hmm. So my friend Charles Stevens, an absolutely incredible guy, have a big crush on him because he is just such a super nerd and just knows a lot of information, right? He lives in Atlanta. He founded an organization called the Counter Narrative Project. If folks have not heard of the Counter Narrative Project, please look it up. Yeah. The Counter Narrative Project is really used to counter the narrative about black men, black gay men in particular. And it is so empowering for the young people of the day. Lastly, I want to mention something else that Charles Stevens, and you'll see why I have such a big crush on him. Charles Stevens and Stephen Fullwood came out with an anthology 2 years ago called Answering Joseph Beam's Call. If folks don't remember, Joseph Beam came out with an anthology in the 80s, 90s, 80s?
86.
80s, I'm sorry?
86.
86.
In the life.
Actually, it's 96, 2000. The 30-year anniversary of, I had to count it in my head. The 30-year anniversary of that was the Answering the Call to Joseph Beam. This is right in the middle of the AIDS crisis, or not in the middle of the AIDS crisis, but right at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. So many men from that time are now deceased because of the AIDS crisis. And there were a few men that joined in this anthology some 30 years later. And so there are some work. Have not seen a lot of work around trans and cis women's issues though. There's still a huge, I'm sorry? Oh, well, so I hear someone say it's coming.
Yeah.
We haven't had some in a long time, so I hope that answers the call.
And the importance of those anthologies was the stories, right? And not to keep pointing Tracy out, but Tracy has written or co-written like 30,000 books on queer history. Yes, very impressive, isn't it? Yeah. 30,000. But also, you know, again, talking about stories, there's Outspoken that happens at Sidetrack every month, and I co-host that show. It's all LGBTQ folks on the stage telling their stories. And we're in our 4th year now of doing that, and I am amazed by the stories of folks from all walks of life, if you will, within the LGBTQ community. And the importance of documenting our stories is so huge. And again, Tracy talks about this all the time. When you think about the AIDS crisis, you think about all those lost stories. And when you think about, you know, young folks dying in the streets, you think about all those lost stories. So having stories and capturing stories in whatever format they're in, that's hugely important for any community.
And the young people of today, I won't say it, Beverly, because I want you to talk about it. But really, the young people of today have changed the platform, right? Yes, and so there's a lot of digital stories out there as well.
So, like I said, I'm nervous. Of course. Yeah. So, how many of you guys in here that are authors? Artists? Yes. All of you guys in here are authors. I'm gonna say this. I'm an author. Didn't know I was an author, and I'm like, what are you talking about? So I was offered to do digital storytelling with Anthony, just about my struggle or what I have endured in my life. You know, whether school, HIV, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe in that. Thank you for opening that door for me. That's kind of like, got me to what I'm doing now. So digital storytelling, you're going to tell more because I'm like,
okay.
I'm like thinking and trying to.
Well, I want you to tell it with me, Beverly.
Of course.
Beverly was someone who wanted to be a part of what it is that we were working on.
Yes.
And you come from the Inglewood community,
Yes.
right? And we don't hear the voices of people from Inglewood, really. Like, we do hear them. We hear somebody else telling their story,
Yeah.
right?
Whether it's the news,
Yeah.
you know, so somebody got shot. I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah.
You know.
And Beverly came to a project. We worked with a institution here on the South Side to tell people stories in 3 minutes or more in their own voices, using pictures, using stills, and using movement photos, video, and their voice in telling their stories around an issue that we wanted people to be inspired by. And so we talked about a struggle. I gave my digital story as well. It's all online. And we talked about the struggle and when it popped for us. One of the things that I talked about was, as a Black gay man, how has HIV impacted me? I don't think there's many Black gay men that are living right now that can say HIV has not impacted them in some way. We asked Beverly and her cohort, it was a group of trans women, to talk about their story of being trans and how they were able to pop and be okay, and how the next person can be okay. And Beverly did such a beautiful job at talking about that and inspiring others, and then ultimately coming to work for the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, and being huge here in Chicago around PrEP. You know, PrEP, and really moving that in the BAL community. Research showed that there was a lot of HIV. And when I say a lot of HIV, I'm talking about folks who were HIV positive that were not on treatment, and they had high levels of HIV and were able to spread HIV at a higher intensity than other communities.
Yes.
And as a result of that, many people in the ballroom scene have been inspired because of people like Beverly being bold and putting their face out there on bus boards and telling their stories around how difficult and how hard it was to transition, but doing it, like living through that hardness of going to school. I mean, her story brought tears to my eyes, quite frankly, because what it did was it talked about a young woman who went to school in Inglewood, who was mistreated, who possibly was about to drop out of high school, right?
I did.
I'm sorry, dropped out.
Yes.
And now working towards school, being a part of the ballroom community, and being a huge leader in the community. And that's what we want to see happen with our people. And that's how we do it, by telling stories and sharing stories. And so storytelling is very important, whether it's through an anthology and us hearing that, or watching it.
Thank you so much.
I think we're at 7:05. Could we take another 10 minutes for questions from the audience? Things you want to raise, follow up on, please. Don't be shy. The first person's always shy. Yeah,
Tracy.
I do want to say that the Historical Museum, actually 20 years ago, did do some LGBT programming. Black Lines newspaper had our first anniversary party here. They gave us the auditorium for free. Actually, Jackie Anderson's recent memorial was here. And in the mid-1990s, Chicago Black Lesbians and Gays had some programming here. So there has been a historical connection. It just kind of ebbs and flows depending on the staffing. So I'm really glad to be back here.
Yeah.
But if we're doing about history, I don't want to forget that part.
That's good. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not asking a question, but I am going to say if you are unable to come to one of the microphones, I can come around with the microphone to you. But if you do have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or come up to one of the microphones.
So this is a question for Beverly and a question for Kim. We have two different generations here. So I grew up in Kim's generation. I hope that's right. I think I'm a little older. But I know what my future looks like. I know where I've come from. I know what it looked like. I know the struggles that I had. but I have these expectations of the future now. I've been told I have a certain amount of liberties, and that's not always true.
Yeah.
That's what I'm discovering. But as a young person, what does your future look like to you? Because from my generation, I never imagined my future would look like being at the DeSabo Museum, having a panel on African Americans and gays. So what does your future look like to you? Because you seem to have, the youth today seem to have a lot of liberties and a swagger that we doesn't have. You know what I mean?
Nice.
You kids have a swagger today. And I say that affectionately.
What do my future look like? Honestly, it looked privileged. You know, with pop culture, I say that again, social media is looking promising a little bit because we have Trump in office, but you know how that goes. Oh yeah, we will. He ain't gonna be here too long. But no, it's looking privileged. It's looking privileged thanks to, like I said once again, my my past heroes. You know, my trans advocates back in the day. If it wasn't for Lois Bates, are you guys familiar with Lois Bates? Come on, like she was the pillar. Yes. So I do know a little history. But no, I say it's looking privileged. I'm happy, to see more trans advocates and trans. We can't forget about trans men also. So I say trans. I'm being inclusive with the spectrum. So it's looking privileged. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, just with the continuum of the work that we're doing. If it's protesting at Capitol Hill, AIDS Walk, schools, the Daily Center, things like that. So I say it's looking promising, and it's looking privileged.
And I say that's good because I kind of agree with you because I see you action and taking that privilege, owning that privilege. Yeah. But how about you, Kim?
Well, I would.
I mean, we're kind of seasoned now.
Yeah.
Yes. Hallelujah.
Some things didn't come true. Some things didn't come true like we thought the idea was going to be.
Yeah, but I would have to agree with Bev. It looks privileged because we're sandwiched in between some amazing folks who have gone through a lot of shit that we didn't have to go through. Yes. And then in front of us, we have these amazing younger folks who are not taking shit. And it's like they're just clearing the path for aging as a queer woman in a different way than aging for a queer woman looked 10, 20 years ago. So I feel very fortunate to be in this moment right now.
I think it was a thing for being fed up. That's like where we at now. So it's like we fed up and we not taking no shit. No.
You can bleep that out later.
Yeah. So, oops.
Whoopsie.
Hello, everybody. So kind of piggybacking on that question, and I want to hear from each person on the panel. In addition to that privilege, we do still have, realities with what the CDC put out, how potentially, if we keep going on the trajectory that we will, eventually 1 in 2 young Black gay men between the ages of 16 and 29 will be HIV positive. We're still dealing with youth homelessness. We're still dealing with what has been called open season on trans women, because it is still very much unsafe to even exist as a trans woman, especially a Black trans woman in society. And so there are some youth that may not feel that sense of privilege and may not feel that sense of empowerment, where they're not able to even know where their next meal is coming from or where they're going to sleep that night. And so with that in mind, as people that are, kind of in a different place and have maybe been there before, just if you can, let's say that there were, as many young queer Black youth as you can, house or watching on Can TV right now or in this room right now. What can you say to them? What message can you give to them for hope when there feels like, even in the midst of progress, that there is none?
Oh, yeah. I will say when I say privileged, I'm looking at that word like happiness is used in the Buddhist sense. you can have a certain state of being even when there's craziness going on around you. So it's not that you aren't impacted by some other things, but there's this sense that you're gonna be okay. So that's to say that there's still a lot of oppression and difficulty that's happening. That's why I do the work I do. That's why many of you in this room do the work that you do. And you know, sometimes getting connected to services is not enough, because we know we don't even have enough services for everyone. When we did the, Tracy and I worked on, I keep pointing to Tracy. Tracy is my activism wife, so. I have my life wife, and then I have Tracy. When we did the Summit on LGBTQ Youth Homelessness in 2014,
I remember.
That was that was a life changer for me, just because young people were so, even in the midst of crisis, were so present for that process of, you know, telling their stories, what they were going through, and I would say trusting us with their stories and trusting us with their ideas to do something, but knowing that it wouldn't happen overnight. And I hate to use the word resilient because it sounds like people don't suffer as they go through things, but what I experienced in terms of folks being able to stand up every day and do whatever it was they had to do, just, it's something that I live with. And I know that's in a lot of people. I think it's a shame that people have to call upon all of those resources within themselves just to get through the day. But I know folks can do that, but I don't know what to say, honestly. There's no words that can take away the suffering that people are going through. I would just say it's what makes me want to work harder every day.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak on the HIV part for as part of your question. Don't want to, because I also know that trans women have also been left out of the research when it comes to HIV, and we don't know about that community. Not that they're not suffering too. We just don't know because there has not been the research as there have been with Black gay men. As a Black gay man who is very single, if you know anyone,
that out there. Who did you see?
I'll just put it out there. Maybe y'all can help me. As a Black gay man that is single, I'm very sexually active still. And the reason why I bring that up, people are like, oh my God, do you really talk about that openly? And I think it's really important to talk about that as a sex positive individual. I am still concerned about HIV. I am still concerned that, and I'm a Black man that enjoys dating other Black men. And also the reason why I say that too is because it's very hard as a Black man to date other Black men. And that is because many of our community has been devastated by this awful disease, because many people in our community ignored us for a very long time. But there are Black gay men that are trying to do something about it. And so I'm glad that you posed the question, because there's there's everybody in this room can do something about it as well. I just talked to our deputy commissioner. He came to our B10 meeting to talk about the new funding process for the city of Chicago. And one of the questions I asked him, and I'm going to stay on top of him, is that many Black gay men are being targeted in testing, are being targeted for research programs. But every institution that I go to, there are very few Black gay men that are leading the charge. They don't have jobs because people are not hiring them in these institutions. And I enlist all of you all. My CEO, Brian Johnson, and I love him, and I'm not an ass kisser, as you can probably see. But I love this guy. I love this white guy, right? Because what this guy does is he is very intentional about making sure that people of color are a part of every process that he makes. And he is a white man who I think could be an example not just to other white men, but for all of us to be inclusive and thoughtful about how we move things forward. And I think that is going to be one way. There's going to be several ways to fight this battle. But one way is making sure that the people who are impacted by homelessness, by HIV, are a part of the discussions and are part of the decision making. It's great that you have an outreach worker you're paying $25,000 a year. That's wonderful. And I encourage people to do that. But making sure that Black gay men and other folks who are impacted by these decisions are a part of the decision-making process.
Nothing about us without us.
I'm sorry?
Nothing about us without us.
Nothing about us without us, at all levels. I want to add that. That wasn't a part of the quote, but I want to add that at all levels.
That's so amazing that you said that. It's more like for trans women as well.
Hi there, my name is Shai Delano Roosevelt.
Decision-making.
Thank you for all your time. This has been wonderful. I have another question, but I want to touch on the point that you brought out about the targeting. I was going to do a story on this. When I go to the L, it's all black, black ads about come get tested, come like we're guinea pigs, Tuskegee, anyone, so I definitely, and I agree with you. That's a good thought to have us lead the charge. You let us do it so we can get more inclusive. My comment was on, and I was late, so I don't know the names. The person there next to the right, you there, yes. I'm sorry, I was late. Angelina, sorry about that. Thank you. I love your quote where you said, if we can't change it, infiltrate from the inside. Get inside of that. I mean, I always say, be the change you want to see in the community. We need to stop. When I think I always say in all of these places I go, the psychology of people, like this mindset of just, I don't want to do anything. What do you think we can do to change the mindset of people to actually start to, take notice that, and also say that, and understand that every issue here, just because they may not be gay or straight or whatever they claim to be or think they are, that everything affects everyone. We're in a symbiotic relationship. We have to understand that if you're not winning, I'm not winning. If you're not winning, nobody's winning. So can you expound upon that? Thank you.
Wow, so where do I start on that? Okay, so for example, when we were all little kids, we've always had this idea of who we want to be when we grow up. And I know that there were several things I wanted to do with my life, and I couldn't make up my mind. And for the life of me, as the years went by, it kind of transitioned from this career path to that career path to this career path. And as time progressed and I experienced some of the most tragic things that a young person at that, of color, can go through, I can honestly say that what shifted that was, how is it that I can change not so much what I went through, but so that there are resources to ease the pain of going through these things. And after taking a break from school, and it took a while to get to the point where I was interested in practicing law. I'm not practicing law right now. I'll get there. So once I understood that maybe I should go into law, that's where the light bulb went off, and it's been on ever since I got that idea. And since writing a congressman can only do so much sometimes, the best thing to do is to run for Congress. Sometimes the best thing to do, instead of writing a letter to the senator saying, hey, this is how it's affecting me, you run for senator.
Right. Yes.
You start rubbing elbows with those people who create the legislature. Those people who create those legislature that typically benefits their own beliefs versus the beliefs of everyone and benefits everyone involved. So when I came up with the career path of going into law and going into HR, I said, I want to use this. I want to use the experience, and I want to use the skills, the knowledge to really help others. Yes. Help those who are less fortunate, to help those who are less likely to be heard, and those who might be under the radar, because those are the ones who might more likely be most impacted by these laws being passed, such as, I'll use myself as a personal example. I'm from Tennessee. Throughout my transition, I went through that whole process of getting the name changed, getting the gender marker changed, this and that and the other. In Tennessee, did you know that Tennessee has a legislature that prohibits the changing of the gender marker on the birth certificate, regardless of what the reason is? So my ID can say female. My social security can say female. My passport says female, but that birth certificate says male. And you know why? Because someone had it in their heart of hearts. And I guess their heart of hearts says, I don't like trans people, or I don't like that tranny. I'm gonna create a law that makes them miserable and out them. So they create a legislature, pass it through the House, pass it through the Senate, that says, we're not gonna let them fool us. We're not gonna let them be who they are. They're gonna be who we think they are. Therefore, they pass the legislature saying, we're not gonna let you change your gender marker. We don't care if you had the gender reassignment surgery or not. That was one of the biggest blows that I can say that I've ever really have witnessed and felt, because even with reaching out to senators who create legislature, who can amend legislature, and seeing that there's not a lot of movement, there's not a lot of rift, caused me for a while to feel really discouraged and felt let down. That a place that I grew up, and that a place where I called home at one point, does not want to create a sense of protection and equality for someone like me, a Black trans woman, a Black two-spirited person of color, who, if I have to show my birth certificate somewhere and it says one thing and my ID says something different, that causes confusion. It causes a very dangerous situation. So after going through that, I was sure that I wanted to go through law school and understand how legislature is created, how policy is created, and how can someone who knows law use that to protect those who are not part of the majority. And for us being minorities, for us, some of us being identifying as feminine or women, we definitely need protections, because as time progresses, we're seeing how we are not being believed for our experiences. Our narratives are not being heard because no one wants to take heed. And being someone that's interested in going into law, we gotta be heard, because something has to change. And that's why I'm going into law. That's why I'm going to law school. That's why I wanna get the JD, and that's why I wanna get the JSD. That's why I wanna be a judge. That's why I want to make sure that everyone in this room can understand what justice really looks like. And it's not the system that we have now. It's gonna be a system that actually protects and serves everyone and not just some people. I could go on, but I don't want to go too long.
we have time for one more question? Okay.
I just want to thank you all so much for speaking. I have a question about what it was like to either create your own support system if you didn't have support from your family of origin. I think you all are all very brave, and I really admire your courage. And I wonder if you had, emotional support from your family of origin, or if you sought that out in community. If anybody wants to speak about that, I'm interested to hear how y'all got so brave and courageous and vulnerable. Thank you.
Okay, so
Beverly's ready.
Okay, because it's like, okay, this is Rub Alley. So my support system was some of my family during my coming up. And I say coming up is my family didn't understand what I was going through. I was also whooped for being gay. Remember, I talked about that, being whooped for being trans. Getting suspended from school because I didn't have the support from, the faculty, when I get bullied. So my support system was ballroom. And ballroom started back in the 50s and the 60s. And I used that support as having gay parents and having that gay family as my support, meaning that this is my family. You don't choose your relative, you choose your family. So that was a way of my outlet, my mechanism to having that support was my gay family, yes. So that started ballroom, the Kiki scene, stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I was in my 30s when I came out. And yeah, so you didn't know that about me.
You're in your 30s right now.
Right, okay.
Looking good.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I feel so much better. Me too. Yeah, so, and married with children and all of that. So it was a journey, and my parents were the first people who I had that conversation with, outside of my husband. And we're very good friends. We've raised our children, we hang out together, we do holidays together, it's all good. But I had to contemplate telling my parents, even in your 30s, you're stressed and you want to not be rejected by your parents, even as you're older and other family members. And both my mother and father took it very well. They were like, okay, so that's great. We still love you. How's Basil, your husband? Everybody okay? And then, I worried about, how do I tell other people in the family? Because they've seen me just, be this straight woman doing all the things you're supposed to do, right? Get married, go to college, get married, have kids. And the house and the 2-car garage and all of that. And I needn't have worried about that because my mother's a blabbermouth, and she outed me on behalf of me, so that was good. And then I had this work situation where I was working at CTA at the time, and I had started there as an intern in grad school, so they'd seen me get married, they'd seen me have my kids, and now it's like, she's queer. But at the time, I had the vice president of my department was an openly gay man, and he had hired a lot of cute openly gay men to be in our department. They were very talented too, but in many ways, apparently. But that's another story. But they became my support system. They would babysit my daughters so that I could date. And I know, right? They had days of beauty with them and all of that. So it was wonderful. My kids were in the Pride Parade with their gay fathers, and then I developed community, broader and broader community after that. So that's the other extreme of coming out, is being much older.
All right.
Ooh, okay, where can I start with the support system?
All right.
What was funny was that long ago in high school and junior high school, I really did not know how to come out, or I didn't even come out at all. I was just there, I was just me. And at the time, this was years before, my transition. This was years before Angelina became who you see today. I was just this one kid who did their homework and participated in choir and participated in Spanish club and was goth and wore nothing but black liner and black everything, because that was just who I was at that time. And that person was really under a lot of stress. That person was under a lot of tension, because there was that lack of support system back then. There was a lack of identity that they could really hold on to say, hey, I'm not going through this alone. And as years went by and that feeling lingered, that's when it really became, it started gradually becoming apparent that I should be more involved in my community. But it did not hit until the beginning of my transition, and that was some years back. So once I began my transition, I really especially needed a support system in some ways. And because I'm not acclimated with the gay scene in general, because I'm introvert, I'm an introverted person, it was a lot more difficult to get to know people, especially when there are some people who have your best interests at heart and some people who have good hearts, and then there's some who just they don't give a rat's ass. So unfortunately, it took a lot of sifting through and really just letting interactions and relationships happen organically without having to force everything, because not everyone that you see coming up the street on Belmont and Halsted is going to be cool with you
at all. Period. Yeah.
And not everyone that comes up is gonna be out to get you either. Some people may just want to get you laid, and some others may actually be looking out for you, making sure you don't get in the cab with some stranger. And it's just a matter of creating a support system. So it took many years of living in Chicago for me to have the support system that I do have now. It's very, 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 very intimate. Probably a handful, literally people I can count on one hand who I can consider as a support system, and that's because not everyone's to be trusted with your plans in life, with your ambitions, with your sense of identity. And even though I am still open to more people being a support system for me, I still have to use a good sense of judgment, judgment of character, and that's because the ones who I have selected to be in my, to be in my circle, those are the ones who go up to bat for me like no one else. And I am so grateful for those people who are in my life and that have really understood me for who I am and really took in the fact that my pronouns are she, her, and hers, judge, and your honor. But I say this to say that it took me many years, and I'm still technically going through it. However, it is more of a residual journey of really bringing my circle together, because once I transitioned, I lost a lot of gay friends that I had in Chicago, a lot of gay friends I had in Memphis. I even lost a couple of friends who I've known from Kansas State, and it was very painful, and a very painful thing, not just for the ones who I've lost through, I guess, going in a different path, but also those who I've lost to death. Some people I've lost to death over the last few years. And the one of the people who I would have considered as my support system is no longer here either. And I would never imagine it. The one person is my father. I lost him 6 months ago. And our last conversation was almost a year ago, where he actually said, I knew you were transitioning. And I didn't tell him because I wanted to tell him myself. I wanted to tell him in person. I wanted to have that conversation because I'm old school. I will write you a letter way before I write you a text. So if it's something big, I'd rather tell you in person. However, some blabbermouth on my dad's side of the family wanted to tell him for me. So we had the conversation, and he said that he loved me after acknowledging, and it was the very last thing I would expect to hear. And when he said that, it just blew me away. It really restored a sense of humility in me that some people have it in them. They just have to find it. And it's a sense of, well, I don't like gay people, but then you find out your son is gay or find out your daughter's trans. It's, you know, it's almost a sense of, well, you're still my daughter, you're still my son, you're still my child, you're still my aunt. It doesn't matter. Love is love. And that's something that a lot of people need to really acknowledge and to internalize. And I think in the Black community especially, that is a process that we need to work on, because our loved ones, the big people in this world, are LGBTQ. They're going to be making the biggest moves that you can ever see.
Tell me about it.
So once we internalize what love really is, which one of those definitions is probably unconditional if you look it up, we'll be in a better place. Because there's nothing like loving on your daughter, whether they're trans or not, loving on your aunt, loving on your father who's gay, whatever. Let that go. Your loved ones, whether they are related by blood or not, they mean a lot more than just some personal belief or stigma that you hold on to about gay people or about the LGBTQ community. Let it go.
Let it go.
Let it go.
Let
Read
go.
and let it go.
That's right.
So before I answer the question, I just want to say thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Senator Halsted, for allowing me and Quality Illinois to be a part of such an incredible program and thinking about me. So I really appreciate that. So my story is, I'll be concise. I came home. First off, let me bookmark the fact that my mom got pregnant with me at 14 years old and had me when she was 15. And she was underdeveloped. She was not even developed yet, to the point where they thought it was going to be dangerous for her to even have me. So there was a possibility that I would not be sitting here. So I'm going to bookmark that. Picture it. I'm going to do a Sophia Petrillo. September 1986, come home, first day of kindergarten. Grandmother says, "How was your day, baby?" And I said, "I loved it." Whatever, you know. I said, "But what is a fag?" Some kid called me a fag. And my grandmother said to me at that point, because I was like, I'm a big boy now.
Right.
But I was tall, lanky, big ears, big head that didn't look like it could be attached to my body. So I was already an awkward child, as I am as an awkward adult. But I was even more awkward then, right? And my grandmother said to me, and I remember this conversation, I don't remember anything that happened in first or second grade, oddly enough. And I don't remember anything in kindergarten, really, but I do remember this conversation. And she says, "You're a different child, and people are going to pick on you. And I want you to know that I love you." That was September of 1986. And those words, you don't know how those words attached to me then and how it still attaches to me today. So my mom, Catholic school girl, mom and dad, my dad's best friend got my mom pregnant, or my mom got pregnant, however you say it, right? It was a struggle in that household. It was a struggle in the household before my mom got pregnant, which is probably why my mom was pregnant, right? At 14 years old. There was stuff going on. And growing up with a mother, a teenage mother, so that would have been when I was 10. To put it in context, my mom was 25. And my mom used a lot of slurs in the house. I'm gonna tell you, my mom was it was hell, quite honestly, for me. I'm gonna tell you something about my mother. About 15 years ago, I said to myself, "Why am I so angry? I am just not happy." And every time I talk to my mother, it's just like, ugh. you know, why do I have an icky feeling when I talk to this woman? But then I heard someone say, now put yourself in her shoes if you got pregnant at 14 years old and imagine what kind of father you would be. I'm gonna tell you, that child may be dead. Just maybe. I may be sitting in an institution or in a jail right now. And so that from that point on, my attitude shifted and I took a new approach to the situation. And when I took that new approach, I then realized the whole time my mother really did love me. She just did not have the skills. What 14-year-old, what 25-year-old, what 40-year-old has the skills to be a parent? I'm 36 years old and I get anxiety every time a baby is near me. And so I had to take a different approach. And so what my coping skills is, and what I learned from that, and my deep learning from that really was that humans are humans. Mm-hmm. And at any point in time, the person that loves me the most, the person that brought me into this world, has the capacity to hurt me. And I know that because I've hurt others. And so my ways of coping is not necessarily telling my friends everything and talking to my friends about my problems. I have done that. It doesn't work out that well, as you all may know. But I'm making sure that I take therapy. I go see my therapist. I take my diagnosis very seriously. When I'm having lots of anxiety and things are happening in my life, that's when I lean to the professionals to say, hey, what's going on with you? What's happening? How can we get you through a plan? And so that, and also like doing things that make me happy. Making sure that I am, what makes me happy and what gives me life is making sure that I am able to bring people with me. So I didn't have the best growing up. I did not. But I have used that to say this is why. You know, there was only two options for me, was to be angry and kill myself because I was on that trajectory. You know, I still kind of sad when I think about it. Or it was to say, you know what, Anthony, there are tons of other kids that are going through this as well. How can you make life a little bit easier for the next person? So that made me work for Planned Parenthood. My grandma made and then lastly, my grandmother sitting in church one Sunday. If you're from the Black Baptist Church, you may know about the morning bench. And I sat on the morning bench every Sunday. And that's where the men sat. And I remember on one particular Sunday, my grandmother, who I know loves me very dearly, she demonstrated that, quite frankly, before kindergarten, but that kindergarten moment was an example of that. And at that moment, she says, I don't want you to sit on the mornings bench. And I said, Mom, I call my grandmother Ma. Ma, why not? She says, because I'll tell you later. Later came, in the car, she says, that guy was HIV positive, and he's gay, and we don't know how HIV is spread. Now, mind you, this is 1997. We know how HIV is spread. We know this. But it hurt me deeply that she would go there. Yeah. And my narrative was to say, F that. And I went to work for I went to volunteer in an HIV/AIDS organization the very next day just to piss her off. Then some years later, when I was telling this story and we were all talking about it, I said, oh my God, I've been beating up my grandmother for all this time. And I realized it wasn't about the man who had HIV or who was gay. It was about protecting me. And she knew something in me. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I've leaned on all these years to get me through things. Wow. And so that's how I've arrived here today.
Wow.
And can we get another round of applause for our awesome panelists and awesome moderator? Amazing. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm still kind of in awe and just how beautiful this evening was to hear your truths and your journeys and your experiences. On the back of everyone's program, you'll see some upcoming events at Center on Halsted. One, we have our latest LGBTQ artist gallery opening on Friday, March 2nd from 6 to 8 p.m. And also continuing the conversation of Black history and Black culture, because it's not just about February. We have a reading by Dr. LaShonda Barnett from her book Jam on the Vine on Friday, March 23rd from 6 to 8 p.m. And then the Saturday right after, she's doing a writing workshop for us, tentatively from 12 to 2 p.m., but times are subject to change, so just keep up with us. Center on Halsted is on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, pretty much everywhere. And if you're ever up on the north side, please give us a visit. But thank you again. Thank you so much. Hopefully this courageous conversation continues. Feel free to ask our panelists and our moderator any questions afterwards. And thank you again to the DuSable Museum for hosting us. Thank you so much.